All right, welcome everyone to the Pathroot live stream, The Parent's Guide to Addiction. I'm Carolyn, and I'm hosting the call today. And with us, we have a wonderful guest, Jenny McCutcheon. Say wave hi. Um, so our topic today is one that I know a lot of us struggle with, and I personally struggle with it as well. So we've entitled our live stream, um, Are You Out of Bounds When It Comes to Boundaries? So today we're going to be talking about the concept of boundaries and how impactful that is when you're working with someone that's struggling with substance misuse and addiction. So Jenny, I'll start with you and just let you introduce yourself, tell everybody who you are personally and kind of what you do and your initiatives so that they understand what your expertise is.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's wonderful to be here. So, my name is Jen McCutcheon. I am the founder of Enable No More Radiant Recovery Programs, and I work with families who are loving a loved one in addiction that are wanting to really find peace and solutions to not only help themselves, but to really have impact and influence over their loved ones, helping move them towards long-term recovery. So, how did I get here is really my own personal experience of over 20 years of loving my loved ones who were impacted with addiction. So, my first and second husband both experienced substance abuse, which was incredibly difficult. But it was my son's journey at age 15 when he began his journey with mental health and addictions that really brought me to my knees. It was like nothing I'd ever experienced before. The pain, the fear, the helplessness, the feelings of powerlessness to save my child. And it created such chaos in my life. I became very, very sick, along with my son, who continued. We both spiraled for many, many years until I really hit my own rock bottom, pivotal moment, that aha moment where I was just like, no, I have to be the one to change. I have to be the one to go first because what I'm doing isn't working. So I started my own healing journey, and I started to find different tools and strategies to help myself. And as I continued my journey of healing and recovery, I was witnessing how it was impacting my son's journey and how it was improving certain areas within our relationship, and encouraging him towards recovery. So fast forward, I recognized what I recognized was that my journey had really awakened me to my purpose, that I could actually help other family members, loved ones that were experiencing what I'd experienced with tools and resources that could help them. And I started teaching yoga and mindset coaching with individuals, and it just kind of flourished. The pain to purpose is really what happened. It was my pain that birthed my purpose. And I'm passionate about helping families navigate this very difficult thing to navigate. And from my experience, I know Pathroots is on this mission as well. There was not a lot of resources out there for me. I was one of the seekers. I was one of those people that looked everywhere for help and support. And I really found myself alone and isolated. And I don't want that for parents. We need to come together and provide resources and collaborate and work together for all these solutions to really impact families and their loved ones to find recovery.
Well, thank you for sharing that. Just to add to that, I also had a similar journey with my first husband and my daughter, who were both addicted. My husband to alcohol and my daughter to just about every drug you can name. Unfortunately, I lost both of them, him to the progression of the disease that ultimately ended in suicide, and my daughter, after 15 years, overdosed and died at age 29. So I think a lot of us, people that are going to listen to this today and in the future, probably see themselves in our struggle and our journey. But today we're going to talk about boundaries. And so, Jen, what I would love to have you do is define for the audience that's listening exactly what you mean by boundaries so that we've got a level set of what we're talking about, and then we'll go deeper into the topic.
Yeah, I'd love to, because for me, boundaries was one of the things that I had zero in my life, not just with my loved one in addiction, but in my life in general. I really didn't understand what a boundary was. And I feel like this is a very common issue with families. We really don't understand what boundaries are for. So when I explain a boundary, I explain it as this is a line in the sand or a pivotal moment where you're going to say no more. It's not about the other person. A boundary is actually to protect your own worth, your health, your happiness, and your peace. So the biggest misconception with boundaries is that you're creating a boundary for another person. You're actually creating, the truth is, you're creating a boundary for yourself. Because ultimately, we don't have control over what another person does or doesn't do. We only have control over ourselves. So when we understand that to begin with, we can start to identify areas in our life that are out of control or we're living in chaos and come back to what we need, what we want, and what we can do to draw a line in the sand of what we will and will not tolerate to create this beautiful bubble of peace and protection.
Yeah, I think most people understand that um, we hold boundaries all the time, just in basic things that we do. For example, you want me to come over at a certain time to your house, and it's inconvenient for me, but if I agree to just do it, or, you know, do something for you that I really didn't want to do, I've just let that boundary slip. And it doesn't have to be conflict or confrontation. It just needs to be, hey, it doesn't work for me, therefore. But I think in terms of working with someone that's addicted or misusing substances, boundaries take on an entirely new kind of aura to them. So talk about a little bit about why boundaries are so difficult when you're working with someone that's struggling with addiction. Why is that really, really hard for people? I mean, if I'm not coming to your house, that's not hard for me to say, hey, it doesn't work for me, but it seems to be much harder when other people are involved in the world of addiction. Why is
Uh-huh.
that?
Yeah, I mean the barriers and the barriers and the blocks to set boundaries are even more challenging with loving a loved one in addiction because we're dealing with fear. Fear is such a huge thing that we are dealing with. We're afraid to set a boundary because of the consequences of that boundary. And that is partly a codependency within the family structure because when we're drawing a line in the sand of protecting our own worth, we're carrying also guilt. So fear and guilt go together with preventing us from setting boundaries. Fear of losing our loved one, fear of the consequences that they may face if we draw that line in the sand, and fear that our loved one will be angry at us, fear that somehow we're not going to be loved or liked, fear that they're going to think that we're abandoning them because we've said no. So there's a lot at play here with fear and guilt that really are enmeshed together. And then, of course, that whole safety issue. It's like the safety of the other person. We're talking about life and death when we're talking about addiction. So it's, I like to say when I'm doing something or I'm setting a boundary, it's coming back to self. It's coming back to, I want to be able to live my life knowing that I've done everything I can, but also knowing that I am not contributing to the cycles at play, that I'm actually contributing to breaking the cycles. So breaking enabling, breaking codependency, but also protecting myself in the process.
Yeah, I think those are some critical points. And I know for sure, given the fact that I disclosed that I lost my daughter to overdose, one of my biggest challenges was fear. If I
Mhm.
don't do this, then what's going to happen? If I don't let her live at my house, if I don't do this, then the dominoes are going to fall that
Yeah.
ultimately, could risk her life. Um, the other thing I personally felt was sometimes it's just easier to give in. All right, I'll just do it because I'm tired. Like I've tried to hold up and my resistance is over with. So let's talk about some of the categories that people struggle with when it comes to boundaries. And I'll launch the first one: financial. I need this money so I can buy food. I need this money because I want to go out with a friend. I need this money because I lost my job. So talk about a little bit about the financial kind of boundary that we tend to cross and why that's not necessarily the best idea we ever had.
Oh my gosh, this is a big one because I mean, hi, my name's Jen. I have given many,
And I'm
many,
Carolyn,
many,
and yeah. Yeah.
many, financial, gifts, thinking that I was doing a good thing. I was helping, right? I was helping. And I will tell you, almost every single time, there was a little voice inside me that said I shouldn't be doing it.
Yeah.
And that's what I really want to really touch on with this is we have to listen to the inner wisdom because we are feeling it. Like if anybody is here and listening to this, raise your hand in your room if you know that you've heard that little voice as you're sending an e-transfer or you're giving your child or your loved one cash, whatever it is, that there's a part of you that's like about to give it, but you shouldn't. You're almost trying to take it back because we get ourselves into providing again financially for lots of different reasons. One, we genuinely want to help. We're born like we're innately wanting to help. We don't want our loved ones to hurt, but financially, we want to believe that our loved one is using it for what they're telling us they're using it for. But the reality is, oftentimes that's not the case. So there are other ways that we can set boundaries without giving that financial monetary amount to them that can go towards using. But there's this false sense of control that if if you give the money, you're trying to control where it's going to go. I like to look at boundaries for myself is again, where is this? What am I using this for? What is my why? What is my intention behind if I'm going to give my loved one money? Do I want to give them money? How do I feel about that? Am I trying to control what they're going to use that money for? If that's the case, I have no control over what they do. So always coming back to self is a way to work through some of those things and to identify what's the why behind it. And are you again contributing to the cycles at play of addiction, feeding addiction, fueling addiction, or are you on the team of breaking the cycles? So financial barriers are really tricky because again, we want to believe our loved one, we want to help our loved one, but when we have somebody that's in active addiction, money is often going towards drugs, which would be contributing to the cycles at play.
Yeah, I mean, I 100% agree with that. I mean, I'm sure that in my daughter's case, if I handed her cash, it was going to go where I didn't want it to go, right?
Yeah.
You know, one of my alternate strategies that I tried is like, okay, you want money to eat? Okay, here's a grocery card. Maybe that's a little, or a gas card. I need gas for my car. Okay, well, here's a gas card. You can only use it at the gas station. Another boundary that I personally struggle with is live at home, because my daughter she would get into these living situations where she wasn't safe. She was with an abusive guy who was a drug dealer, or she didn't have a place to live. She got kicked out of treatment or sober living. And sure, you can come home. I have a basement apartment that you can live in, no problemo. And I felt like it was super counterproductive for her because it stifled her ability to be an adult. And like, okay, you're going to live independently. You have to learn to pay your rent, get a job, be a good tenant. Talk to us a little bit more about just that boundary of come live with me and why that gets broken so often, and why is that counterproductive?
Yeah, it's one of the hardest, right? Because we look at this tough love, this tough love concept, right? We want our kids to come home. We desperately want our children. I remember my son coming home for a period of time, and when he left, he had left a pair of shoes at the front door. And I swear to you, if anybody moved those shoes, I lost my mind. Like his shoes at the front door meant everything to me. I'm telling you, it was like if anybody was going to touch those shoes, they were going to die because we want our kids to be home. We want them to be healthy, well, happy, part of the family. And when our kids are struggling and they're on the streets or they're couch surfing or they're in and out of treatment or whatever the scenario is, the moment that we have the opportunity, we could bring them home and love and nurture them. I call this the mama bear mindset. The mama bear mindset is, nothing comes between me and my cub. We're going to bring them back home. We're going to have them. And this is like so common with so many families. But what we don't recognize is we are getting in the way of their natural unfolding process. We are actually preventing them from taking ownership and responsibility. They are resilient, they are capable, and they are incredibly resourceful. But when we step in and bring them in and try to take control of that, I know it's, again, coming from a very natural, nurturing place, but we want them to take ownership and responsibility over lives. So when we step in and bring them back in like that, we're actually getting in the way of the natural unfolding process, even some of those tough consequences that they may need to learn to be able to move on in that growth and development. Part of this too is codependency. So enabling and codependency is one of the 7 traps of addiction that I've identified. And enabling codependency is addictive, emotional addiction or relationship addiction, where we actually are doing these things, whether it's giving money or bringing them back home, as a means to try to actually regulate our own central nervous system. We're looking on their safety and security is dependent for us to be safe and secure. So there's this cycle that happens with our loved ones where I'm going to bring them home so that I can just relax for a little bit. It's a codependency. I need them to be okay for me to be okay. And often, again, this doesn't work. We're perpetuating the cycles of addiction. We are feeding addiction.
Yeah, I mean, I 100% agree with that. To me, it was, if I could see her and I knew where she was, then I could reduce my fear, which was always there. I mean, it was always way up there. And if I didn't know where she was and I couldn't find her, which was a lot, then you're left to wonder, okay, well, is she safe? What's going on? So to reduce fear was a huge issue for me. But one thing I said to my son's got a 2-year-old little girl.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, one of the primary objectives you have as a parent over her lifetime is to have her become increasingly less dependent on you.
Correct.
And so we turned around and we reversed that cycle. Now we just made them a lot more dependent on us without actually really realizing it. So we've talked about money and we've talked about places to live, which are, to me, the 2 hardest boundaries to hold. What are some other boundaries that tend to like make you jump into quicksand and you just don't even know it?
Well, I think, one of the common things that I see a lot of women and that I struggled with was those phone calls or those demands. So, it's like there's an emotional boundary, an energy boundary where we're not setting boundaries up to protect our overall health and wellness. So, I mean, I remember seeing phone calls coming in and cringing, like, not terrified to answer the phone or really just triggered, almost like a trauma response to answer the phone because of what am I going to be dealing with on the other side? And that's motion regulation. So we allow ourselves to get into a place where we're emotionally deregulated because we have no boundaries around creating a protective barrier and learning how to actually manage these emotions and heal some of these traumas that we're experiencing. We don't even really understand that they're traumas or trauma responses, but we've been programmed to just deal with these heightened emotions as being normal. And they take a toll on our overall health and well-being. So I would say those emotion regulations, the emotional boundaries that just aren't in place, and people, it's like jumping into burning fire. You're just jumping. Every time something happens, you're jumping back into that chaos and confusion, and it just creates and fuels addiction again. So being able to set some strong boundaries around being able to look at a phone call and decide not to answer it, right? Knowing that you can step back and make that call back. So putting some distance with love and compassion, and understanding that there is no certainty. So there's this attachment to certainty too, which again, what you talked about, needing to know where they are, needing to know what's happening, which creates this emotion dysregulation.
Well, it's also a control thing, like, you know, we
Yeah.
love to control the outcome. And one thing I also know about people that are active in addiction is they're really master manipulators. They know they had, you know, like all these things we're talking about with our emotions. Um, my daughter for sure knew those things, and she played to them
Oh
because
yeah.
she was intuitive. So what are some of the tactics that your loved one will probably use on you to get you um to breach that boundary? So um I'll give you one for me, then you can respond to it. Mom, I really need that. So it's just kind of that language, like, Mom, I really need you to do this for me. That
Yeah.
that always triggered me. So what are some of the other like little tactics that they use that we need to watch out for?
Yeah. So, a big one for me is that escalation where it's like almost abusive in nature, where it's very, you can either have that like, Mom, come on, like, I need this. I'm hungry. I'm hungry. I'm starving. I don't have a sleeping bag to sleep on the street. I need a sleeping bag, right? There's like that guilt tripping that you're going to let me sleep on the street. Another one though is when they lash out and they're really angry and they're saying really hurtful things. Like that's been my experience where it's like, you don't give a shit about me, you don't care. If you cared, you would do this for me. And then it triggers my own insecurities of not being a good enough mom. If I was a good enough mom, my son wouldn't be here. So there's all these triggers that they're very good at knowing how to push those buttons. So recognizing again when we're being there's a demand being placed on us or where there's this manipulation that's happening, that it's okay to pause. It's okay to step back and recognize. But we have to do the only way that we can recognize it though is if we are aware of it. And this is one of the biggest challenges is being conscious, being present with the experience and not being overwhelmed by your emotions. Often we're so overwhelmed that we're just in panic mode and we're just trying to like move past that thing to get it over with. So we'll give in because we just want it to be over, which is again where enabling and codependency comes in. So being able to be present, to be able to take a moment and press pause, either saying, listen, I can't answer you right now. I need a little bit of time to think about it. I'll get back to you.
Yeah,
Taking a step back.
another one for me is false hope. Gosh, Mom, I'm doing so much better now. And if I can just use your car and borrow some money to go get some outfits, I've got these job interviews and I'm really like on this trajectory. And oftentimes your false hope gets dashed because they didn't mean any of that. They need
Yeah.
the car to go meet the drug dealer and they need the money to go buy the drugs, and it has nothing to do with what they said. So if you recognize the pattern of saying that they're going to do something positive and then they don't, then I think you need to recognize that that's a pattern that you need. Once they do it, then you need to avoid it. So it might be, I appreciate and understand that you think you need these things, but I'm not, based on what's happened in the past, I'm just not willing to provide them for you at this moment in time. If things change, I'll let you know. So that false hope for me is like I got my hopes up and they just got dashed.
Yeah.
Uh,
Those false expectations, right?
yeah.
Yeah.
So let's
Yeah.
talk about what parents should do when um, that you're being asked to cross a boundary that you don't want to cross. You mentioned one thing specifically: take a pause, stop. The second thing you mentioned was tell them that you'll get back to them, not feeling the pressure to immediately respond. What are some other things that not just parents, but anybody, if they're
Mhm.
being asked for something that doesn't feel comfortable, what should they do to avoid that?
Yeah, so I actually have an acronym that I use, which is pause. So P is to literally press pause, just like you press pause on the
Yeah.
TV show that you're watching. Literally press pause and say and like take a breath and just take a moment, because we often jump in just trying to get past the moment, and then we're not happy with how we handled it, or it doesn't turn out well. So pressing pause is just, again, saying, I'll call you in 30 minutes. I need time to think about it. It's okay to do that. And if they're going to, the way that they respond to that is on them. So take a pause, take a break, step back. A is to ask yourself the question, again, am I contributing to the cycles of addiction, or am I contributing to breaking them? This is a very quick way that has worked for me and my clients to be able to really kind of zero in really quickly. How do I want to proceed? And then U is to unlock the 3 C's. So the 3 C's are really, we have to be compassionate with ourselves. This stuff is hard, what we're going through, right? Self-care. If we're acting from a place of emotion dysregulation, we need to calm our central nervous. We need to take time. And maybe it's not till the next day that you get back to them. Maybe, once you've been practicing this, it gets easier because it's a skill that you're developing, right? So, we want to be able to just sit with it for a little while. So that's S, just sit with it. Give yourself time. Maybe you journal. Maybe you look at the pros and the cons. Maybe you look at how you're feeling in your body and how it's activating your body. And then being able to just deliver your boundary. So maybe you've come to the conclusion, this is what I need to do for me, right? Making sure that it's not trying to change them, but it's being enforced to protect you. So an example, like giving money, you say, let me think about it. Well, maybe I'm not going to give you money, but I'm willing to come and drop you off some groceries. If you're hungry, I'm happy to come and drop you off some groceries if you're in the area or whatever. And then if that's not, so then you could get to evaluate it at the end. Did it work? Did it not work? Because this is a skill that is developed, right? It's the idea that you're just going to set a boundary and you're going to know how to set boundaries. Boundaries are always, there's like these lines in the sand that aren't always straight lines. And sometimes we're able to change and maneuver and recognize where it worked and where it didn't work, and recognizing there is no right or wrong way. It's just practice.
Yeah, I think as we're getting close to wrapping up our conversation, I'd like to leave some folks with a final thought for me, then I'll ask you to do the same thing. But a final thought for me is that holding boundaries and all the emotions that go with it are super hard for us, the ones that are trying to help our addicted loved one. But we also have to keep in mind that it's equally as hard for them. They're struggling to manage a disease that's got a hold of them. They don't feel good about themselves. There's a lot of shame and stigma attached to what they're doing, even though a lot of the manipulation tactics are wrong. So I think, we have to forgive ourselves for, the emotions and guilt that we feel around holding these boundaries, but also too, we have to do it with the lens of understanding that the person that we're that's pressing our boundaries is also struggling with a disease that really makes them act in a way that they wouldn't act otherwise. So that's kind of my final thought, is forgive yourself, but also be empathetic with their struggles. What would be your thought process on that?
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. I think when we're able to learn how to set real healthy boundaries, we are doing it from a place of compassion for our loved ones and acceptance for where they are. So I know, being able to deliver a boundary that is hard to deliver because we're being challenged to really protect our own worth, being able to, share that boundary with compassion and acceptance for where they are, and also to be able to receive a boundary placed from your loved one to you.
Yes.
So boundaries go both ways. And this is one that I had to learn, but is really, I have to respect my son's boundary. When he says to me, Mom, I'm not ready to talk about this, or I'm not going to talk about this with you, or Mom, I really wasn't looking for your opinion. If I ask for your opinion, then you can tell me what you're thinking. Like, boundaries go both ways. we have to respect each other's boundaries. And, our kids have, and our family members have a right to set their boundaries and have their boundaries be respected as well. And when we're able to figure out our come back to self and figure out the boundaries with ourselves, we're going to respect and honor somebody else's boundaries because we know that they're doing it for their best interest. And I think that's what I would wrap this up with. When we're setting boundaries with our children, we're being a guiding light of how to love ourselves and protect ourselves. And that's ultimately what we want our children. It's a skill that we want them to learn for themselves, setting their own personal boundaries of what they're willing to tolerate and not willing to tolerate in their lives. So we get to be a shining light or a mirror reflection of boundary setting and how to do it with compassion and love and acceptance.
Yeah, I think that's so important. I wish we had had more time to explore that one area, which is by holding and setting boundaries for yourself, you're teaching them to do it for themselves. And I think people that are active in their addiction often super struggle with that. They get involved with people, they do things that they shouldn't do, and they don't hold their own boundaries. And I can tell you personally, I was terrible about not respecting my daughter's boundaries. She would tell me, don't do this, and I would do it anyway because I just did. So I think that's super important. So thank you for your insights. For those of you that are watching this stream, make sure to go to the post, the information right below it, because I will make sure to put your contact information, how to get to your website. So if people want to learn more about you and get some thoughts on how to better manage what they're doing, they have a way to get in touch. So with that, everybody, from the Parents Guide to Addiction, Family's Guide to Addiction, appreciate your help, and we'll see you on the next episode. Thank you.
Thank you.